Greetings and welcome back to the lesson. Today we are going to study the responsibilities of external auditors and management in relation to errors and frauds. What are the responsibilities of the external auditors and what are the responsibilities of the management in relation to errors and frauds? So we are going to begin with management's responsibilities. Management responsibilities. Management responsibilities. What is the role, the responsibilities, the duties of the management in relation to errors and frauds? So, candidates, the primary responsibility of the management, or let me put it this way, that management is primarily responsible for the prevention and detection of errors and fraud. Right? The management is primarily responsible. That is the primary responsibility of the management, to prevent and detect errors and frauds, because it is the responsibility of the management to prepare the financial statements of an organization. So, this primary responsibility includes designing, implementing, and maintaining internal controls that effectively mitigate the risk of misstatements, whether due to error or fraud. I've mentioned primary responsibility, and I've said that this primary responsibility of the management in relation to errors and fraud include designing, implementing, implementing. It is the role of the management to design, to implement, and also to maintain internal controls, to design, implement, and maintain internal controls that effectively mitigate risks. That effectively mitigates risk of errors and frauds. That's the primary responsibility of the management. The second responsibility is preparation of financial statements. Preparation of financial statements. Now, the management is responsible for preparing financial statements that are free from material misstatements, whether caused by errors or fraud. Preparation of financial statements. Preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatements. That are free from material misstatements. Preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatements, whether caused by error or fraud. Whether caused by error or fraud. That is the second role of the management in relation to error and fraud. Do you understand? Yes. 3, fair presentation. That's yet another role of the management, fair presentation. The management is responsible for ensuring that financial statements present a true and fair position, true and fair view of the company's financial position, performance, and cash flows. It is the role of the management to ensure that financial statements present a true and fair view, fair presentation of the financial statements. That is the role of the management. The management has a responsibility to ensure that the financial statements portray a true and fair view. Portray a fair and true and fair view. That is the role of the management. Another role is in relation to internal controls. Internal controls. Internal controls. The management is responsible for establishing and maintaining effective internal controls to prevent and detect fraud and errors. To prevent and detect fraud and errors. That is the role of the management in relation to fraud and error. Then lastly, we have communication. Another responsibility is in relation to communication. The management is responsible for communicating any known or suspected fraud or errors to the auditor and those charged with governance. Communication of any occurrence, all right, or any known or suspected, communication of any known or suspected fraud to the auditors. That is the role of the management in relation to fraud and errors. The management has a duty to communicate any known or suspected fraud to the auditors. So these are 5 roles: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 management responsibilities in relation to error and fraud. Can we now move on to auditors' responsibilities? Auditors' responsibilities. What are the auditor's responsibilities? And here we are referring to the external auditor. The first responsibility, reasonable assurance, is to provide reasonable assurance. The external auditor is responsible for obtaining reasonable assurance, that the financial statements are free from material misstatements, whether caused by error or fraud, and that involves planning and performing the audit with professional skepticism and exercising professional judgment. The auditor has a duty to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free from material misstatements. 2, assessment of risks. Assessment of risks. Auditors are required to assess the risk of material misstatements due to error and fraud and to design audit procedures to respond to those risks. And that includes considering the effectiveness of a company's internal controls, assessment of risks. 3, detection of material misstatements. Detection of material misstatements. That is the responsibility of the auditor. While not primarily responsible for detecting fraud, auditors are required to alert to the possibility of fraud and then conduct procedures designed to provide reasonable assurance of detecting material misstatements. You understand? The primary responsibility of detection, prevention of errors and frauds lies with the management. However, auditors should be alert to the possibility of fraud and then conduct procedures designed to provide reasonable assurance of detecting material misstatements. You get the difference. Detection of material statements and even prevention, including deterrence, that's the role of the management, but it's not the primary role of the auditors. But as much as the detection of fraud and errors lies with the management, auditors are required to be alert to the possibility that there could be errors or frauds within the company. And the auditor are also required to go a step further and conduct procedures to provide reasonable assurance of detecting material misstatements. 4, reporting. Now, if the auditor identifies or suspects any material misstatements due to error or fraud, they are required to communicate their findings to the management and those charged with governance. And depending on the circumstances, they may also need to report to regulatory authorities, depending on circumstances, depending on the laws, depending on the nature of the fraud. They may also be required not only to report to the management, but also to regulatory authorities, like the Kenya Markets Authority, like the Securities Exchange, and so on. You understand? So that is the auditor's responsibilities in relation to errors and frauds. Assignment. What is management's primary responsibility regarding the prevention and detection of errors and fraud? 2. How does the external auditor's responsibility for detecting fraud differ from management's responsibility? 3. Explain the concept of professional skepticism and its role in the auditor's assessment of fraud risk. 4. What are the potential consequences for management if they fail to disclose non-fraud to the auditor? 5. How can effective communication between management and external auditors help to reduce the risk of fraud? In our next session, we are going to study the auditor's professional skepticism. Bye.